Okay, so this video is going to be different from my regular ones. Here we have footage of me in the Smolensk update 0.10.0, and let's talk about this update. This update is probably one of the worst reworks I've ever played. It addresses basically none of the problems that were with the old captain skills, and just makes the problems in the current game worse. Thunderer is beyond broken, Conqueror is beyond broken. Ships like Smolensk have been barely touched, and of course, because reasons, secondary builds have been nerfed, while long-range sniping has been buffed. Because what is more fun than beating a dead horse? Now, I'm gonna try and make this video as not biased as possible, and I will go over some of the pros and some of the cons of this update, but it cannot be ignored that this update has ushered in a horrendous meta. It is awful. I mean, why on earth would I play a Grosser Crew first in this meta? Why? With all the Thunderers running around, plus the Sky Cancer, and all the HE spam, pushing in is completely irrelevant. It is all about how well you can do at long range. So without further ado, let's get into this. Let's talk about the pros first. One good thing that came with the captain skill rework was that you can now have a captain assigned to one specific ship, but you can have him trained for different skill sets on different ships. So your 19 skill point Des Moines captain can be transferred over to, say, your Massachusetts, and you can run a secondary build while keeping your Des Moines build intact. That is a great change, and hats off to you, Wargaming. That's a great change. Another great thing that came with this rework was there is now more variety for captain skills. For example, the old captain skills, there was only two builds you could be running on a battleship. Either you were running a tank build or you were running a secondary build, and there was nothing else. There were skills that no one ever took. For example, support fighters, where upon using the fighter consumable, an extra fighter aircraft was launched. That's a useless skill for a useless consumable on a useless mechanic in this game. So, seeing that be removed, not sad to see it go, because there were a lot of skills that you just didn't use, like Last Stand on a battleship. You'd never use Last Stand on a battleship because you just don't have your steering or engine knocked out often enough to warrant that those two skill points. So now adding in more unique skills allows us to have more diverse games. The problem is they completely made all of this null and void with a specific skill that I'm certain you already know what it is, but we'll talk more about that later. Another great thing that came with this captain skill rework, reduced commander training costs for assigning captains to different ships. So essentially what they did was they built in the 200,000 credit 50% option, so you don't have to pay the 200,000 to get the 50% anymore, it's just baked in. It's also nice that we are now earning 5% Commander Elite XP even on captains that don't have maxed out skill points, and that is a nice change. Also, it has to be said that the upgrade from 19 skill points to 21 is a nice change. It is a very nice change. It allows you to take even more skills, but then again, to run the old tank build, it essentially now costs 21 points instead of the previous 19. Still, not 21 skill points is nice. You can run more skills. And if nothing else, at least the Smolensk got nerfed this patch with a reload that is now 4.5 seconds long instead of the old 3.6. So at least you won't be seeing shit like this.
Smasky, narkoman, smasky, hooligan, smasky, narkoman, narkotik kurish, 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 smasky, narkotik, smasky, narkotik kurish, narkotik, narkoman, narkoman, smasky, narkotik, smasky, narkotik kurish, narkotik, narkoman, narkoman. Narkoman, narkoman. Hooligan, hooligan. Narkoman, narkoman.
If ever there was a reason to keep this commander skill rework, it's that Smolensk got nerfed along with it. It's still stupidly overpowered, it's just not nearly as bad anymore. Moving on, let's get to the cons of this commander skill rework. Number 1, the XP required to get those last 2 skill points is insane. It's like 1.2 million commander XP. That is an insane amount. Assuming you do a decent game, you're probably getting maybe 2,000 commander XP in a battle. To get to 1.2 million is an insane amount. So that should be reduced. That should be reduced. Like, the two of them together should probably be around 700,000 maybe. But 1.2 million is way too much. Now, German secondaries. Oh god, wargaming. Way to take a already bad build and make it completely worthless. Before the rework, I would have argued that speccing into German secondaries was a bad idea, because it was 14 skill points, and the German battleships are seen from space, and because of how big they are, they're an easy target to farm. And in this day and age of just HE spam from Smolensks, Thunderers, Conquerors, and Sky Cancers, you cannot afford to give up tankability, fire prevention, concealment, because those are core mechanics in this game. Which is why, on my Grosser Kurfürst, before, I was running just a tank build. Because, in my eyes, I'd rather not be seen, and if I was seen, I'd rather not be on fire constantly. So, before, when the secondaries actually did have somewhat better accuracy, especially compared now, I considered it a bad build. And now, there's no reason I would ever run a secondary build on something that was not Massachusetts, Georgia, or Ohio. And that's only because those ships have the accuracy baked into them. Like, you didn't even need the manual secondaries before the rework. You don't need them after. German secondaries are so useless. Because while they can pen 32 millimeters of armor, what does that mean when the Thunderer, which you can pen, is sitting 15 kilometers away, firing high explosive at you, and you cannot have fire prevention? It's not a good skill. So, especially now that the accuracy on these things has been nerfed to hell, why? Why would I ever run a secondary build on a German battleship? Like, I was playing Le Terrible, and I went in a perfectly straight line and I got hit maybe once. And when it hit, it only did 300 damage. So that's 10 skill points for something that could barely hit a destroyer not 8 kilometers away. I also find it infuriating that you thought the biggest problem with the German secondaries was that they didn't have enough range. That was never the problem. The problem was that you couldn't hit anything. You still can't hit anything with them. It was 14 skill points for maybe 100 secondary hits if you were lucky. Maybe. And now it's 10 skill points and you might get 100 secondary hits? Why? Why would you run anything that was not Deadeye on a battleship right now? It's ridiculous. Like, German battleships before were just bad. They were tanky, sure, but if you wanted a tanky battleship, then you could have gone and played the Kremlin. And now, why on earth would I play my Grosser Kurfürst? There's no reason to. The German secondaries before were bad. And after this rework, they're completely useless. Like, who cares if they have a range of 13 kilometers when they can't hit anything outside of 5? The only ships that are going to be pushing are things like Kremlin. Maybe Kremlin. Everything else is just going to be hiding in the back. So, if the only thing that you can fight with your secondaries at the beginning of the game is going to be a Kremlin, which your secondaries can't pen anyways, then why on earth would I run a secondary build? Because they're not going to be doing damage, they're not going to be hitting. The only damage I'm going to get is fire damage. And maybe they set fires, but if they don't, well then that's 10 skill points that could have gone to Adrenaline Rush, Basics of Survivability, Deadeye, Concealment Expert, Fire Prevention. All these other skills that are guaranteed to work. So, you've just completely butchered this, what was already a bad build, and you've made it so much worse. And I don't see how you think range was, I don't know how you see that range was the issue with them, because it was never the issue. It wasn't the issue. The issue was you can't hit shit with them. You still can't hit anything with them. Because there's no point in running a secondary build for extra damage if they don't damage anything because they can't hit anything. So, if you want to make German secondaries actually useful, you need to buff their accuracy. You need to buff the accuracy because it doesn't matter if they can pen anything if they can't hit anything. American secondaries aren't nearly as in a bad position as the German secondaries simply because they do hit stuff. And you will always deal more damage if you can actually hit something than if you can't hit something. Because it doesn't matter if the secondaries don't pen as much and can't overmatch the pen 32 millimeters of armor that the Germans can. Because they have a 9% fire chance, they're hitting almost constantly, you're gonna start fires with them. So, on average, an American secondary ship is going to deal more damage than a German secondary ship. There's no reason to run a German secondary build anymore. If you want a secondary ship, get Massachusetts, Ohio, or Georgia, but don't build secondaries on the Germans. The next thing I want to talk about, and I've been meaning to talk about this for a while now, is the HE spam in this game. Because HE spam to me in this game is an overpowered mechanic. But it's not, I don't think that there's anything we can really do about it. And that's simply because we need it in the game because it gives ships that otherwise wouldn't be able to do any damage some way of dealing damage. It's not nearly as efficient as armor piercing, but it will eventually kill something. So I see it as a necessary evil, and if I'm being honest, like, even if I wanted to say, let's do something about it, I wouldn't know how you would go about changing it, because right now, high explosive is kind of in a somewhat balanced state, or as balanced as it can ever be. But that doesn't mean that certain ships are abusing this. Thunderer, Smolensk, Conqueror. Why do we have these ships in the game? Like, why do you insist on putting these ships into the game? The Smolensk is an absurdly strong ship, because you have 16 guns firing every 4.5 seconds with an 11% fire chance. That is insane. That is an insane rate of fire with an insane fire chance. So, no wonder the meta has been moving more stagnant and stale over the previous couple of updates, because you just keep adding more shit that doesn't need to be getting close to deal effective damage. It can just sit at the back of the map, press 1, and just hold down the left mouse button. Thunderer, for example, that ship is beyond broken. It can do like 15k damage regardless of angle. It doesn't even need to leave the damn spawn to do 200,000 damage in a game. It can easily set upwards of 15, 16 fires in a game. So there's no way to counteract that. If it was armor piercing, you could go bow in. But you can't, because if you go bow in, that doesn't matter. It's still gonna pen you. So, and on top of this, we have aircraft carriers, which just completely ignore every single other universal law of this game of, if I can hurt you, you can hurt me. With carriers, they can just, well, they hurt you, but you can't really do much against them. So, high explosive has been pushing this meta to long-range spam for a long time now, and it's getting even worse. Like, the brand new Italian battleships are coming out with SAP. And while SAP doesn't have the ability to set fires, SAP has the ability to do 10k damage regardless of angle. Even easier than the Conqueror or Thunderer can. So, we're going to see even more stagnant play because people aren't going to want to push into these brand new Italian battleships. Where do you think this meta was going to go? You add in ships like Thunderer and Conqueror and Smolensk, and you don't think that people are going to start playing more passively because there's no way for them to be beaten? Because a Conqueror can just, if it doesn't want to pick the fight, it disappears. It doesn't have to pick the fight, it has a super heal, and if it sits at it doesn't matter to a Conqueror because armor penetration isn't important when you fire nothing but high explosive. Speaking of carriers, man, carriers have been making this gameplay, like, they were introduced to stop stagnant play, and that's literally all they encourage, because in open water there is nothing you can do against the carrier. Like, maybe you can avoid his ordnance, but then you are giving broadsides to his teammates. So what's the solution to this? You gotta find an island, put yourself up against it, hope you don't get spotted, and if you do get spotted, well, at least you're blocked from half the enemy team firing at you. So, carriers encourage this passive play even further, which is why even before 10.0 with the Deadeye skill introduction, we were seeing idiots in Kremlins playing like snipers. Like, the more high explosive we add to this game, the less enticing it is to push, because there's nothing you can do about it, really. And carriers are just making it even worse because they don't have to give a damn about setting up a cross angle, like a crossfire. They don't have to worry about that. That's a 2-second job for them. And if you angle against the carrier, then you're giving broadside to his teammates. So, no wonder this entire meta has shifted to long-range sniping with ships that previously were considered tanky and aggressive, like the German battleships or the Russian battleships, are now starting to play super passively because there's what can a Kremlin do against a Thunderer? If the Thunderer is angled and beyond a range of like 15 kilometers, the Thunderer is going to win that fight any day of the week. Any day of the week. Which brings us to the final thing that I really want to talk about. Deadeye. Oh my god. If ever there was a skill that just needs to be removed from this game, Deadeye is it. Because while I do agree with what Wargaming said with there is a place in this game for long-range ships that excel at long-range engagements, absolutely. Absolutely. That is absolutely true. There is a place in this game for ships that excel at longer range fights. But I don't feel like we should be actively encouraging them to open the distance as much as possible. Because that leads to what we're seeing now, where no one pushes to because they want to activate Deadeye. And if the battleships don't push, which have the most armor and HP with heals, nothing else wants to push. So we're left with games that are just decided by whichever team dies first, practically. Either the one team will push because they have battleships that are willing to help tank and grab a cap, or you have a whole bunch of Conquerors and Thunderers that are sitting as far away from the enemy as they can so they can get that minus 10% buff. And like now we're actively encouraging them to sit as far away as they can. We thought that it was bad before with the HE spam and carriers being added to the game. It's getting even worse now. I mean, it just outclasses everything else. It doesn't frickin' matter if you have great armor and great tankability, because a Thunderer with the Deadeye is going to land 7 out of 8 high explosive shells on you for almost 20,000 damage and 2 fires. And if you put that out, well, 20 seconds later, he's doing it again. So, like, why are we encouraging this? This is literally what we've been trying to get battleships to not do. We've been trying to get them to push in to help support their teammates in grabbing the objective, and now we turn around 180 and are like, let's actively encourage them to sit as far back as possible. Because literally every other build is meaningless, especially at high tiers. Because a secondary build, as I've mentioned before, is a waste of skill points. There's better skills for the same amount of skill points, unless you are running something like the Massachusetts, the Ohio, or the Georgia that have that amazing accuracy that it's actually somewhat worth it. So, right now, you've got basically one build for high tiers. And that build basically involves anything that is going to help you excel at long range is what you take. And then whatever you can't, whatever isn't going into long range is going into anti-fire. Because carriers are dropping you for 10k with high explosive, constantly setting you on fire, and conquerors and thunderers are running rampant with high explosive fire damage. So how do we fix this? It seems to me that the easiest way is you just remove Deadeye. You remove Deadeye and replace it with a skill that, upon having a ship within the detectability range of your ship, will activate a skill that gives you a better resilience against fire and high explosive damage. This would encourage battleships, especially the Grosser Kurfürsts and the Kremlins, to push in, because now they actually have a skill that encourages them to push and rewards them for being there taking damage, because they're not taking as much damage. As long as you are spotted by the enemy, then you automatically have a reduced chance of being on fire, and it reduces the amount of damage you take from long-range high explosive volleys. I feel like this skill would be absolutely amazing, and it would actually encourage battleship players to push aggressively with their team. Which is exactly what we want, and not what we currently have. Because we cannot allow the meta to just be long-range fights. It's not fun for anyone. It's not fun for the cruisers, because now they have no support, and they're just getting killed from across the map. It's not fun for the brawlers, because their entire thing is pushing in and fighting, only to then get absolutely raffle-stomped by a battleship that's so far in the back of the map, he might as well be in the next match over. And destroyers, destroyers are the only ones that in this rework have not been royally screwed over. They're like the only ones. But they still get screwed because cruisers get screwed. So now they've also lost their support. So if a Fubuki or any Japanese torpedo boat comes across a enemy gunboat, that ship's dead. It's gone. There's nothing they can really do. If we encourage battleships to support cruisers and cruisers to support the destroyers, now we actually have some interesting gameplay. The cruiser can help support the destroyer actually has support from the cruiser, and anything that wants to shoot at the cruiser has to deal with the battleship. But if we continue to encourage these long-range sniping engagements, then we're just gonna see a dwindling number of people that are willing to actually support the team and play the objective. We're just gonna see more and more damage farmers. More and more people that just want to sit at the back, get their damage in, and then move on to the match. And that's kind of where the meta is going right now. So hopefully, if Wargame, you actually are listening to this, I hope you take what I've said and, I don't know, reflect on it, maybe do something about it. Anyways, guys, I guess thanks for watching.